This video is going to be a quick overview of how to create a histogram. In this particular example, it's actually easy for us because they've given us the intervals to use. So all we have to do is create the tally, the frequency, the true class intervals, find the mid-interval value, and then go ahead and create our histogram. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we begin to figure out our frequencies, we are going to create a tally. This is one way to go ahead and figure out the frequencies. So notice I'm going to start with 10 and I go 10 and I do a tally because that's the group it belongs to. 34 belongs right here. 37 will belong down here. 33, 12, 15, 34, 34, 34 again, so that's 5. 13, 28, 34 again, 11, 13, 36, 23, notice how I'm crossing them out as I use them, 38, 31, 16, 16, 36, 26, 28, 12, 19, 19 again, 33, 19, and 12. So this is what's meant by a tally, okay? Some of you may not like to do it that way. Some of you might actually want to just go looking for the groups and then writing down how many numbers there are. If that's how you like to do your problems, then right now I would go, okay, let me find everything that's from 10 to 14. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So right now I count 7. That's my frequency. And if I check with my tallies right here, sure enough, I have 7 tallies. So that's another way of doing the problem if you don't want to use the tallies. But using the tally, I can very quickly see I have 6, 1, 3, 8, and 4. I always like to double check how many numbers I have in total and make sure that it adds up to that same amount. So 7 plus 6, 13, 14, 17, 25. The total number here is 29. Let's go ahead and count to make sure we have 29 numbers. Sure enough, we have 29 numbers, so we are correct. Now to create our true class intervals. Why do we need true class intervals? If there is a gap between these numbers in your intervals, like notice how they jump from 14 to 15, 19 to 20, 24 to 25, there is a gap. So when I go to create a histogram, my first bar right now is going to go from 10 to 14, but then the other one is going to jump 15 to 19, let's say. And we want no gaps in between the bars in order for us to create a histogram. So because of that, we are going to create what's called a true class interval. To find the true class interval, you're going to take half off the first number, which is the lower bound, and you're going to add half to the upper bound. So the first one, 10 to 14, becomes 9.5 is less than or equal to x less than 14.5. The next one's going to become 14.5 is less than or equal to x less than 19.5. 19.5 is less than or equal to x less than 24.5. And then 34.5 is less than or equal to x less than 39.5. If anything, it's very tedious, okay? It's just very tedious to sit there and write that down. But you need to, because that's how you're going to create your bars. And notice right now, there is no jump anymore between the lower bound and the upper bound from the preceding group. So now they completely match, which means I'm going to have no gaps in between my bars. The last thing we want to find possibly is the mid-interval value. The mid-interval value is the midpoint. To find the midpoint, you're going to add, for example, in the first one, 10 plus 14 and divided by 2. It's the point in the middle. It makes sense. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. The middle value is going to be 12. And the way I find it algebraically is by adding the lower and upper bound together and dividing it by 2. It's the same thing that I'm going to get if I use the true class interval. If I add 9.5 plus 14.5 and I divide that by 2, I'm still going to get 12. Okay, so we're going to do that for each one of these. The next one is 17, 22, 27, 32, and 37. So now my job is to create the histogram. So I'm going to come down to my histogram and I'm going to label my x-axis true class interval. If the question is in context, meaning you know exactly what this data represents, then you can go ahead and write it. In this case, it says it's the number of days. So the number of days spent on revision for a final exam by a group of students. So how many days the students spend studying for their final exam? I could, instead of true class interval, write down number of days spent on revision instead before the final exam. Okay, so I can be very specific, but for now, we're just gonna go ahead and use true class intervals so you understand how to actually create this histogram. And then my y-axis is going to be labeled frequency. It is imperative. It is a must that you label the axes of your graph always. Very important. The next thing we're going to do now is realize that the space from 0 to 9.5 is not going to be the same as the space from 9.5 to 14.5. Okay, all of these bars right now are evenly spaced out. The amount of numbers included in each group, which is called the class width, is from 10 to 14. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, the class width is 5. There are 5 numbers included in each one of these groups. From 10 to 14, there are 5 numbers. But from 0 to 9.5, which is my first true class interval, it's not the same. So I'm going to make my life easier on this graph, and I'm going to go ahead and make a break in the graph to signify that the amount of spacing from 0 to the first number is not going to be the same. Then I'm going to use each one of these major bars here, one of these major lines, to indicate that we're going to go from 9.5, 14.5, so on. So 9.5, 14.5, 19.5, 24.5, 29.5, 34.5, 39.5, and the last one is 44.5. Okay, so I've actually don't even have to go as far as 44.5. I basically have everything that I need. So now I'm going to go ahead and create my bars. So the first one goes up to 7. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So my first bar is going to go from 9.5 to 14.5. And it's going to be up to 7. Because of the graph, notice, and even though I'm using a different color pencil, so one of the things that I want you to realize is that it's important to go ahead and shade in your graph because of the grids on that graph paper. And a lot of times on testing, it just makes it easier for the reader who's looking at your graph to look at them already shaded. The second one is going to go from 14.5 to 19.5, and the frequency is 6. So the second bar is going to be 6. The next one is 1, then 3. So 1, 3, 8, and 4. I guess we did have to go up to 8 because I didn't include it. I didn't see it the first time. So 8 and 4. So this one's going to go all the way up to 8. And the last one's going to be 4. Notice that without shading, it's kind of hard to tell where you are graphing. That's why the shading is important. And you should shade nicely. Take your time. It doesn't have to be messy. I hate when kids just go like that. Okay, that's being very lazy. So just go ahead and shade nicely. And now in front of you, you have a beautiful histogram. And you have completed the problem where you have basically created a frequency distribution table, and then you have created a frequency histogram.